She's not on your lease, so she presents herself for verification tomorrow at 9, Patricia said, pressing a violation notice into my chest. No ID, no amenities, no access, until we're satisfied. The gatehouse printer chattered behind her. I didn't flinch. Careful, I said. That demand doesn't exist in our governing documents. Her smile thinned. You don't decide policy here, Mr. Reyes. I design security for a living, I replied. I know exactly which lines you just crossed. If you've ever felt that surge of power when standing up to bullies, hit subscribe now. This showdown was about to become a masterclass in fighting back. I took the paper. It was warm and smelled like toner and citrus cleaner. The language looked official, but the citations were sloppy. No bylaw numbers, no board vote, no due process notice. Here's what you didn't expect, I said, tapping the margin. Your email server still pings the door camera I installed years ago. I've got a time-stamped record of this handoff. My name's Daniel Reyes, licensed civil engineer. I build perimeter systems for hospitals, data centers, and, ironically, this gated community, back when the board valued safety over spectacle. Quiet was leverage. I'd used it since the day my sister died and left me her daughter to protect. Sophia is 16 and rebuilding herself one careful swim at a time. The pool used to be her sanctuary, the snap of lane ropes, the sting of chlorine, the chirp when the turnstile welcomed her home. When Patricia revoked her access pending verification, it wasn't a policy. It was exile. My hand tightened on the notice until the edge bit my palm. Patricia leaned in, perfume too sweet for the heat. 9 a.m., Daniel. Or the fines double, and we note your non-compliance for counsel. Counsel can read, I said. Inside, the old training spun up. Observe, record, preserve chain. The gate camera hummed. I folded the notice, slid it into my back pocket, and let my heart slow. Where are you watching from? I asked the lens I imagined. The one that keeps people honest. Because if you've dealt with an HOA like this, you know what toner mixed with threats smells like. She tried to reassert control. Verification means in-home inspection of any person seeking amenity use. Dress appropriately, my jaw went cold. She's a kid, I said. You're out of line. That's the policy. No, I answered softer. That's you. The gatehouse AC rattled. Sun flashed on the scanner glass and drew a thin blade across Patricia's badge. Behind her, a family waited. I stepped aside so they could pass and caught the father's nod. Witnesses mattered. Patience mattered more. Under the awning, the heat hit like a shove. Gravel crunched under my shoes. Beyond the palms, the pool fence glittered, locked for my household by a database field someone toggled, with a smug wrist. I could almost hear the denial waiting for Sophia, a dull thunk where a chirp should be. The paper scraped my skin as if to remind me that contact leaves marks. I breathed in metallic noon and let the plan form without giving the show away. No speeches, no shouting, just leverage. I've won more fights by knowing which wire to pull than by throwing a punch, and this board had wired itself badly. The gate buzzer rasped once, then fell silent. I pictured the turnstile chirp returning to her like an apology. I turned toward the exit, with the sun drilling into my neck, and made a quiet promise to the hot air and brittle grass. You chose the wrong family to corner. I was done being polite. Right now, leverage first. Tonight I'd audit every public rule they've posted and the trail they forgot they left. Tomorrow I'd make sure a judge watched what Patricia tried to hide. Neighbors would remember who started this, and why. When it was over, the neighborhood would hear the same clean signal, the gate unlocking for Sophia, the chirp carrying across concrete, a single note that says, "You belong." I walked out of the gatehouse with the notice burning a line against my leg. The heat slapped me hard, but it wasn't just the desert sun raising my pulse. Patricia's demand wasn't some one-off abuse. It was part of a pattern, and everyone in this community knew it. I'd seen the bulletin board in the pocket park stuffed with notices, stacked like a paper graveyard for reason. Each one told a story of power wielded without restraint. Mrs. Devlin, who lived 2 doors down from me, once had to rip out a mobility ramp her son built after a stroke because Patricia claimed it didn't match community aesthetic. She shuffled past me now with her cane, shaking her head at my folded slip of paper. "They got you too," she whispered. Her eyes held more exhaustion than surprise. I slowed my stride to walk beside her. "They're not stopping this time," I said. "They're trying to get into my house." She didn't look shocked. She just tightened her grip on her cane. "They think nobody will fight them." That was the heart of it. Patricia didn't rule by law. She ruled by attrition. Keep the fines rolling, wear people down, let them break before the rules do. Most folded, some moved. A few paid in silence to protect their families. That's how abuse thrives. The bulletin board came into view. Layers of flyers clung to it, edges curled by heat. Half of them had Patricia's name at the bottom. Threats dressed up as notices. Improper plantings. Mailbox non-conformance. Unauthorized vehicle. The language was always the same, clinical, detached, stripping away dignity like skin peeled from fruit. I pulled one down at random. A neighbor fined for leaving a kayak leaning against a fence. Another told to remove wind chimes because they disturbed harmony. A father walked by with his son, shaking his head at the board. "We don't even let him ride his scooter anymore," he muttered. "They warned us about sidewalk noise." His boy's scooter wheels rattled against the asphalt anyway, and the sound rang out like rebellion. I pinned the new notice Patricia gave me right next to the others. A small act, but one that turned private humiliation into public proof. Neighbors stopped, stared, then whispered. One of them, a woman I barely knew from the north cul-de-sac, raised her phone and snapped a photo. A ripple went through the group, like the first breath before a storm. Patricia's shadow lingered even here. I could almost hear her voice, cold, rehearsed, weaponized, pushing people to believe compliance was safety. But the stories piled up around me said otherwise. Compliance didn't make us safe, it just kept us quiet. I looked back at the pool. The gate shimmered in the heat, locked to us now. Sophia had used that water to heal, to let muscle memory drown out grief. Cutting her off was more than spite. It was cruelty aimed at the most vulnerable point. I clenched my jaw, felt the sweat drip along my collar, and told myself this couldn't stay hidden. "Daniel," Mrs. Devlin said softly, "they've gone too far. Maybe you're the one who can do something." Her voice shook, but there was a spark there, the kind that catches dry grass if you let it. I studied the board one more time, the layers of paper curling against each other, each sheet a wound. Patricia had left a trail of intimidation thick enough to bury us, but trails go both ways. They lead back to the source. I pulled out my phone and started snapping photos of every single notice. Neighbors noticed. A man in running shorts crossed the street to help peel off the older ones. Within minutes, the board looked stripped bare, each flyer stacked in my hand like evidence waiting for daylight. The crowd that had gathered didn't cheer. They didn't need to. The silence was heavier, stronger, and it pressed against my chest like a promise. Where are you watching from? Because if you've lived under rules like these, you know that silence can be the loudest protest of all. As I walked back toward my house, the notices weighed down my arm, but not my will. Patricia thought fear kept her untouchable. She hadn't accounted for what happens when fear turns into fury. And she hadn't yet seen what happens when the wrong engineer decides to trace the wiring back to the source. I still had the stack of notices under my arm when I turned the corner toward my street. The sun had dropped lower, throwing long shadows across stucco walls. That's when I saw Marcus Hale sitting on his front porch. HOA, binder balanced on his knees like it weighed more than stone. He wasn't reading. He was staring at the cover, knuckles white against the spiral. "Rough day?" I asked, stopping at the edge of his walkway. He startled, then forced a tight smile. "Daniel?" "Yeah." You could say that his voice trailed off, as if every word had to pass through a filter of doubt. The porch boards creaked as he shifted, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees. He tapped the binder once, then pulled his hand back like it burned. The body told the story, before his mouth ever did. Shoulders tight, eyes darting toward the street, as if he expected Patricia herself to materialize and scold him for even talking to me. I set the pile of notices on his porch railing. The papers fluttered in the dry wind. "Looks like a pattern to me. You've been in those board meetings, Marcus. You know what's happening." He rubbed his forehead, muttering, "I'm supposed to back the board." His foot bounced against the porch, restless, betraying nerves he didn't voice. Patricia says unity is everything. And what do you say? I pressed. His eyes flicked to the binder, then back to me. For a heartbeat, the conflict cracked through. I don't think she had authority to send that notice to you. He glanced away immediately, jaw tightening, like he'd revealed too much. I leaned against the porch post, letting the silence stretch. The cicadas screamed from the palms overhead, filling the gap with static. His hands worked the edge of the binder until the cardboard bent. He wanted to help. His body screamed it. But fear of Patricia's retaliation kept him nailed to that chair. Marcus, I said quietly, they're targeting a 16-year-old girl. You saw the wording? You think that's policy? Or Patricia freelancing? He winced at Sophia's age. His throat bobbed. For a second, he looked like a man about to stand, about to say what he really thought. But then he sagged back, eyes narrowing, as if retreat was safer than rebellion. I can't, he whispered. Not yet. The porch light buzzed above us, moths thudding against it. Every part of his body radiated conflict, fingers drumming, knee bouncing, eyes refusing to hold steady. This was the kind of man who'd been roped into helping the community and then cornered into compliance. I picked up one of the notices and handed it to him. He hesitated before taking it, his thumb stroking the bold letters. Violation. They're counting on us to stay quiet, I said. But this is bigger than me. It's about whether they can make up rules as they go. You know it. You've seen it. His lips parted, like he might confess something, but the screen door creaked behind him. A woman's voice called from inside. Marcus, dinner's ready. He flinched, shoved the notice back into my hand, and closed the binder like a vault. I've got to go, he muttered, standing abruptly. His movements were jerky, awkward, like a man walking against himself. I didn't push further. Pressure now might snap him in the wrong direction. Instead, I nodded and gathered the stack back under my arm. I'll see you around, I said. He paused halfway through the door, gripping the frame like an anchor. His shoulders rose and fell with a long breath. Without looking back, he said, Be careful, Daniel. She doesn't like losing. Then he disappeared inside. The cicadas swelled louder, almost mocking. I stood there in the fading light, binder creases etched in my memory. Marcus was caught between fear and conscience, and sooner or later, that tension would have to break. Where are you watching from? Because if you've ever seen someone torn between doing what's right and keeping their place, you know how fragile loyalty really is. Patricia thought fear would hold him forever. I had a feeling she'd miscalculated. The morning after Marcus's half-confession, I walked Sophia to the clubhouse for her swim sign-up. The air was heavy with sunscreen and chlorine, a smell that usually steadied her nerves. Today it carried something bitter. She clutched her towel like it was a shield, eyes fixed on the turnstile. The event room buzzed with families, the hum of chatter bouncing off tiled walls. Flyers flapped on tables, sign-up sheets rustled, and the pool gate's electronic chirp punctuated the air each time it admitted another kid. Sophia's cheeks flushed, not from heat, but anticipation. This was supposed to be her place of healing. Then the chirp cut short when her wristband hit the scanner. The gate gave a dull, flat thunk. Red light. Denied. Patricia stood nearby in a wide-brimmed hat, her smile as staged as the flowers on the registration table. She's not cleared for amenities until verification, she announced to the room, her voice carrying enough volume to silence conversations. Heads turned, neighbors watched. Sophia froze, her shoulders hunching like she wanted to vanish. My pulse hammered. This isn't policy, I said, stepping between them. Patricia's eyes glittered. It's board directive. You've been notified. She gestured at the stack of violation notices in her hand. The audience of parents and children shifted uneasily, whispers starting at the edges. The humiliation was complete by design. They wanted her to feel unwelcome. They wanted me powerless in front of witnesses. The tension pressed against my ribs, hot and suffocating. I leaned down to Sophia. We'll fight this, I murmured. Not here, not like this. She nodded, eyes brimming, towel clutched tighter. I guided her back toward the exit, but my engineer's mind was already cataloging details. Patricia had no amended bylaws in hand, no board vote minutes, no statutory authority. She was improvising power in public. Improvisation leaves traces, emails, gaps in procedure, inconsistent enforcement. Exactly the kind of defects judges don't forgive. A neighbor caught my arm as we passed. "They did the same to my daughter last month," she whispered. "Different excuse, different humiliation." Her grip trembled. "I'll tell you more if you need it." That was the opening I needed. The pattern wasn't just visible, it was reproducible. Each act of overreach stacked into a record too thick to ignore. Patricia thought she was isolating us, but every denial, every threat, every fine tied her further into the same rope. I caught sight of Patricia's reflection in the clubhouse glass, smug, chin tilted, watching me retreat. She thought the game was hers. What she didn't see was that her own arrogance was documenting itself in real time. Outside, the desert heat hit again, sharper after the cool of the clubhouse. I steadied Sophia in the shade, handed her water, and let her know this wasn't about her failure. This was about someone abusing authority. The shame didn't belong to her. Drop a like if you've ever wanted to stand up to unreasonable rules like this, and subscribe to see how this strategy plays out. The crowd inside started buzzing louder. Parents who'd watched the spectacle were now debating quietly. Some shook their heads, some raised phones, some walked out with their kids. Patricia wanted submission. What she planted instead was doubt. I filed that sound in my mind, the murmur of unrest, as clearly as the gate's denied beep. Both were signals, and I'd built my career on tracing signals back to source. Patricia had just given me another breadcrumb, one she couldn't erase from the collective memory of the room. Sophia leaned against me as we walked home, towel damp from her grip. Her silence hurt worse than any words could. I promised myself she would hear the gate chirp again, not just as a sound, but as a statement that she belonged. "Where are you watching from?" Because if you've ever seen someone try to humiliate a child to enforce control, you know it leaves a mark deeper than any fine. Patricia thought she was tightening her grip. What she really did was give me the proof I needed that her authority was paper thin. That night, I spread Patricia's notice across my workstation at the engineering office. The hum of servers filled the room, a background rhythm I knew by heart. To anyone else, the letter looked official. Tight fonts, bold headers, HOA letterhead stamped at the top. But to me, it read like a system with exposed wiring. Every engineer knows, if the circuitry doesn't match the schematic, something's wrong. I took a red pen and circled the missing bylaw references. Normally, every enforcement notice has a citation, Section 3.1, Section 7.2, something that ties it back to the covenants. This one had nothing, just vague words like board directive and policy compliance. No section numbers, no signatures from the secretary or treasurer. Patricia had written this herself. I flipped open my laptop, logged into the community portal, and pulled up the governing documents I'd memorized years ago when installing the gate cameras. CC and RS, bylaws, and amenity rules, all searchable PDFs. I typed verification into the search bar. 0 results. Tried. Inspection. Still nothing. The only inspection authority granted was for common area repairs and safety equipment. Nothing about people. Nothing about residents' bodies. The paper trembled in my hand, not from fear, but from anger tightening my grip. Patricia wasn't enforcing a rule, she was inventing one. That's called acting ultra vires, beyond the power granted. Judges don't tolerate it. I leaned back, staring at the ceiling tiles as the hum of the servers seemed to sharpen. A pattern was forming. Denial at the pool, fines without basis. Now a forced verification with no legal foundation. Each step revealed not strength, but overreach. Overreach leaves cracks, and cracks let the truth pour through. I pulled out the stack of notices I'd collected from the bulletin board and lined them up across my desk. Kayaks, ramps, chimes, scooters, each one a scar on the neighborhood. I compared the language. The fines all cited bylaws, even if stretched thin. Patricia had done her homework before, so why was mine different? Why strip the citations out this time? The answer chilled me. She knew it wasn't legal. By omitting references, she was trying to create authority by intimidation, not by rule. If I folded, it would set a precedent she could wield against anyone. If I fought, her bluff would be exposed. I highlighted the footer at the bottom of the notice. Prepared by board counsel. The font was different, sloppier. I'd drafted enough technical reports to spot a pasted line. Counsel didn't prepare this. Patricia did. My phone buzzed. A message from a neighbor. They denied my daughter again? Said the board hasn't approved her enrollment. Same wording attached was a photo of her notice. I zoomed in. Identical language, identical spacing errors. Patricia wasn't just targeting us. She was mass-producing false authority. I opened a blank file and started building a matrix. Column A, HOA demand. Column B, claimed authority. Column C, actual bylaw or statute. Most cells in column C stayed empty. The pattern was undeniable. She was stacking demands on air. The air in the office felt heavier now, thick with heat from the machines. Sweat gathered at my collar as I typed. Each keystroke was fuel, each gap in authority a spark. I wasn't just protecting Sophia anymore. I was exposing the entire foundation Patricia had built her power on. Where are you watching from? Because if you've ever seen a bully rely on paperwork to scare people, you know how fragile that power is once the paperwork starts to fall apart. I saved the file, backed it up to 3 drives, and printed the first few pages. The words glared back at me. No authority. My heart slowed as clarity settled in. Patricia had written herself into a corner. She just didn't know it yet. By morning, the plan wasn't just hypothetical. It was in motion. The notice Patricia shoved at me had given me 24 hours. Now, a second email arrived. Time-stamped 7:02 a.m., subject line, mandatory verification appointment. The body was short and vicious. Failure to comply will result in referral to Child Protective Services for welfare review. The words made my throat go dry. They weren't threatening me anymore. They were threatening Sophia. That line, child welfare, was the nuclear button. Patricia was daring me to blink. I printed the email, slipped it into a folder, and grabbed my keys. My gut told me to keep moving, keep documenting, keep control. At the pediatric therapy clinic later that morning, I sat in the car with the windows cracked while Sophia walked inside for her session. My hands wouldn't stay still. The folder sat on the passenger seat like a live charge, buzzing with the weight of that one phrase. When she came out, towel slung over her shoulder, I forced a smile. How was it? She shrugged, gaze fixed on the pavement. She was strong, but this was cutting into her confidence, piece by piece. The sun bounced off the windshields around us, too bright, too sharp. I started the engine just to drown out the silence with the low growl. Back home, I opened the HOA portal again, scrolling through meeting minutes. The most recent upload stopped 2 months ago. That was another violation. Arizona statute requires timely posting. Patricia had locked down the paper trail on purpose. She was operating without quorum, without transparency, without legal standing. That second email was proof. She'd stepped completely outside her authority. My chest tightened with something between fury and focus. This wasn't just overreach. This was reckless endangerment, dragging a teenager into the crosshairs to win a fight about power. That's when the decision solidified in me. No more waiting. I'd take it to court. Emergency relief, if necessary. I wasn't going to let Patricia write her own laws. I called a friend who'd clerked for the county court years ago. How fast can I get a temporary restraining order against an HOA board? I asked. He didn't hesitate. If you've got evidence, today. Judges hate overreach. Bring the notices, the emails, everything. I looked at the folder again. Inside was more than paper. It was the last line of defense for my niece. I imagined Patricia's smug smile at the pool, her perfume masking poison, and my grip tightened on the steering wheel. That evening, I drafted my own timeline. Every notice, every denial, every inconsistency. I included the red circle gaps in the bylaws, the fake council footer, the missing minutes. Each entry was a nail in Patricia's coffin, each date a hammer strike. The clock ticked louder as the sun fell. I sat at the kitchen table, pen scratching across legal pads. Sophia, upstairs humming, faintly to herself. That hum was fragile hope, and it cut deeper than any silence. I signed the last page and slid it into the folder. The decision was final. Tomorrow, I'd walk into the courthouse. Tomorrow, the judge would see Patricia's paper empire collapse in real time. Where are you watching from? Because if you've ever stared at a line you refuse to let someone cross, you know the feeling in my chest right then. Patricia thought she'd cornered me. She didn't realize she'd just driven me into the only place she couldn't control, a courtroom. The next day I met Marcus at the public library in one of those small study rooms with frosted glass walls that muffled sound but couldn't block the nervous tapping of his foot. He sat hunched over the HOA binder again, shoulders stiff, eyes flicking toward the door every few seconds. When I stepped in, he pushed the binder across the table, as if it weighed too much to hold. "I can't keep this," he said quietly. "If Patricia finds out I even showed you—" He broke off, rubbing his temple. His knee bounced harder. I sat down, laid my folder beside his, and kept my voice low. "She sent me an email threatening to call child welfare. On a 16-year-old. Tell me you think that's what the bylaws allow." His face went pale. He opened the binder with trembling hands, flipping to the last set of minutes. "That policy? It doesn't exist. She never put it to a vote. There's nothing in here." He jabbed at a blank space where the agenda should have been. "She told the board attorney had approved it, but we never saw an opinion letter. We never even discussed it." His fingers shook as he turned the pages. "Look, last meeting was adjourned before quorum. Half the board wasn't present. Patricia just started issuing directives on her own." I leaned closer. The paper smelled faintly of ink and dust, the margins smudged from his hands. "So she lied," I said, "and you have the proof." He looked up, eyes wide. "Do you understand what happens if I testify? She'll bury me. She'll spin me as disloyal, ruin my reputation in the neighborhood. I've got kids here, Daniel." I let the silence hang for a moment. The hum of the library's air vents filled the space. Then I placed Patricia's violation notice on top of the binder. "She's already burying my niece. If Sophia breaks under this, if child services shows up at my door because of a fabricated policy, what then? You'll still have your reputation, Marcus, but she'll have destroyed a child." His jaw worked as if he were chewing on the weight of my words. Finally, he exhaled long and shaky. "All right, you'll need minutes, and you'll need me to say under oath that she acted alone. I'll do it, but you protect my family from her retaliation." The relief hit like cool water after a desert run. This was the missing piece, an insider to confirm what the documents hinted. "I'll protect them," I said, "and the court will too." Judges don't like unilateral tyrants. Marcus shut the binder, but his hand lingered on the cover, knuckles pressed white. He was still terrified, but he was also resolved. That conflict etched itself across his features, a man torn but finally tipping toward conscience. We walked out of the study room together, the sun flooding through the library's glass doors. Outside, the heat shimmered over the asphalt, and for the first time since this began, I felt like I wasn't walking alone. Where are you watching from? Because if you've ever had someone finally step out of fear and into courage, you know how powerful that shift feels. Marcus had given me exactly what Patricia never expected, an ally from inside her own walls. By the time I left the library, Marcus's promise echoed in my ears like a steady drumbeat. I had the insider piece I needed. Now, it was time to stitch everything into a plan that could withstand Patricia's bluster and stand tall in front of a judge. That evening, I walked into a downtown co-working space that hosted a weekly legal aid clinic. The air smelled of burnt coffee and printer ink. Volunteers hunched over laptops at folding tables, their chatter low but focused. I signed in and waited my turn, folder heavy in my lap. Every page inside felt like a loaded round I was preparing to chamber. When my name was called, I sat across from Kari Nunez, a pro bono housing attorney with sharp eyes and sleeves rolled to her elbows. "What's going on?" she asked, glancing at the thick folder I placed on the table. I opened it carefully, sliding out Patricia's verification notice first. "My HOA president issued this. No citations, no signatures, no authority. She tried to force my 16-year-old niece into an in-home inspection. Kari scanned the page, brow furrowing. This isn't enforceable. There's no legal basis here. I spread out the timeline I'd built. Every notice, every denial, every missing minute from the board's records. Red circles glared up from the pages like wounds. She claims council approved it. Marcus Hale, a board member, says otherwise. He's willing to testify she acted without a vote. Carrie leaned back, tapping her pen against her teeth. You've got an ultra-virus situation. The board exceeded its authority. That's a standing issue. Judges don't like boards inventing powers. Her words were oxygen. I'd been right about the gap. Now I had legal confirmation. She pointed at the missing minutes. File for a temporary restraining order first. That stops enforcement before tomorrow's deadline. Then pursue declaratory relief to invalidate the fines and revoke her fabricated policy. With Marcus testifying, this isn't just defense, it's offense. I nodded, adrenaline tightening in my chest. I can draft the motion tonight. I've written technical briefs for federal contracts. I know how to format evidence and cite statutes. Carrie smiled faintly. Engineer, huh? That explains the matrix. She tapped the chart where I'd mapped every demand against non-existent authority. Judges love visuals. Use this. Make it impossible for them to ignore. The hum of the room faded as my focus tunneled in. I saw the path. Compile Marcus's statement, highlight the missing quorum, attach the fabricated notice, and lock it all into a motion that framed Patricia not as a tough president, but as a rogue actor with no legal ground. When I left the clinic, night had fallen. The desert air was still hot, but the sky shimmered with city lights. I walked to my truck with my folder tucked under my arm, pages rustling like allies whispering encouragement. In the cab, I spread the documents across the dashboard and started arranging them in the order I'd file. Evidence first, Marcus second, statutes third, visual matrix last. Each piece slid into place like wiring on a circuit board. By the time I was finished, the plan hummed with its own quiet energy. Where are you watching from? Because if you've ever sat in the dark with nothing but paper, determination, and the will to protect someone you love, you know that silence isn't weakness, it's the sound of preparation. Tomorrow, Patricia would face more than defiance. She'd face the system she tried to twist, and the engineer who knew exactly how to show the judge where the wiring broke. The next morning, I drove straight to the city's community center, folders seatbelted beside me like a passenger. Inside, the computer lab hummed with the whir of old machines and the faint smell of toner. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, harsh and steady. I claimed a station near the wall, spread out my notes, and began assembling the pieces. First came the sworn statements. I typed out a declaration summarizing the pool denial, attaching the time-stamped screenshots from the HOA portal that showed no such policy ever existed. I added the violation notices I'd collected from the bulletin board, every kayak, wind chime, and scooter citation. The scanner clunked as I fed them through, each beep another nail in Patricia's coffin. Then came Marcus's contribution. He'd emailed me a draft statement at dawn. The board never voted on nor authorized any verification policy. The president acted unilaterally and misrepresented legal counsel's involvement. His words were short, cautious, but deadly precise. I formatted them into an affidavit template, left the signature line blank, and sent it back to him with instructions to notarize. I created a second chart to supplement my original matrix, this time color-coded. Green cells where bylaws supported fines. Yellow where authority stretched thin. Red where Patricia acted on nothing. The verification column glowed blood red across the board. No votes, no quorum, no statute. Just Patricia's handwriting pretending to be law. Neighbors trickled in while I worked. One man leaned over the divider and whispered, "She threatened to tow my car for being 2 inches over the line." "Can you use that?" He handed me his notice. I scanned it, added it to the pile, thanked him. Another woman stopped by with her phone, showing me photos of the playground gate locked for non-compliant households. Each item bolstered the record, a consistent pattern of abuse, spread across the entire community. By noon, my evidence binder was 3 inches thick. The printer spat out exhibits with their page numbers crisp and unbroken. I clipped each set neatly, my engineer's precision making the paperwork look less like desperation and more like architecture. Every page supported the structure of the case. I filed an official records request through the HOA portal while still in the lab. Arizona law required them to respond within 10 business days. I didn't need the documents immediately. The request itself showed the judge I was following proper channels. If Patricia refused, that refusal became more proof. When I finally leaned back in my chair, the lab was quieter, only a handful of people clicking at keyboards. I rubbed my temples and let the fluorescent hum wash over me. My eyes burned from the screen, but my chest felt lighter. For the first time, this wasn't just survival. It was strategy. I packed the binder carefully, sliding Marcus's affidavit draft into the front pocket. The spine pressed firm against my palm, not like a burden, but like a shield. Outside, the sun slammed down, the sidewalk radiating heat up my legs. I walked to my truck with sweat prickling at my neck, but also with a sense of momentum that overpowered the discomfort. Where are you watching from? Because if you've ever gathered proof against someone who thought they were untouchable, you know the weight in your hands doesn't feel like paper. It feels like power. That evening, at home, I laid the binder flat on the kitchen table where Sophia was finishing homework. She looked up, eyebrows raised at the mountain of exhibits. "What's all that?" "Leverage," I said simply. Her eyes widened, then she smiled faintly, the first time in days. Patricia thought she was burying us in notices. What she didn't see was that every notice was evidence, and every piece of evidence was a brick in the case I was building to bury her instead. By the next morning, the binder wasn't just a collection of evidence, it was a weapon, sharpened and ready. I walked into the county courthouse self-help center with the weight of it pressed against my ribs. The room smelled of disinfectant and stale paper, a low murmur of voices echoing off marble walls. People lined up clutching folders, each of us carrying our private battles into public light. At the counter, the clerk raised an eyebrow at my stack. "Emergency motion?" "Temporary restraining order," I said, sliding the petition across. My voice stayed calm, but inside my chest, the rhythm pounded. Every word I'd typed last night now sat in black ink. Marcus's draft affidavit, the matrix of bylaws, the fabricated verification demand. The clerk flipped through the pages, eyes scanning the red highlighted columns. She nodded once, stamped the top page, and handed me a case number. "Judge Brooks is on duty today. You'll be seen before noon." The numbers glowed at me like coordinates. Noon. Less than 3 hours. I walked to the lobby, sat under the clock, and laid the binder open on my knees. My hands traced each tab section. Notices, minutes, affidavit, exhibits. I checked them twice, then again, making sure nothing was out of order. Engineers don't just build systems, we anticipate where they'll fail. I pulled out my laptop and opened the HOA website one more time. I wanted a live capture of the policy page, time-stamped. I hit print to PDF, saved it, and backed it up to a thumb drive. That was the beauty of digital records. They left trails Patricia couldn't erase fast enough. By the time she realized I'd archived them, they'd be exhibits in a courtroom. A man across from me leaned over. "HOA trouble?" he asked, nodding toward my stack. "Yeah," I said, managing a small smile. "Overreach?" He chuckled without humor. "Aren't they all?" Then he went back to his own paperwork. Even in this place, strangers recognized the pattern. By 11:30, a bailiff called my name. My pulse jumped as I gathered the binder, feeling its heft one last time before stepping through the wooden door into the waiting chamber. The air inside was cooler, quieter, every sound muffled by carpet and wood. Judge Elena Brooks sat at the bench, glasses perched low on her nose, a neat stack of files at her side. She looked up, nodded. "Mr. Reyes?" "Yes, Your Honor." My voice sounded steadier than I felt. She gestured. "We'll hear your motion shortly." Opposing counsel has been notified. I sat at the petitioner's table, laying out the binder with precise order. Exhibits fanned to the left, affidavit draft centered, timeline and charts ready. Each piece was a gear in the machine I'd built. If I turned them in the right sequence, the whole structure would hum. Patricia thought intimidation would silence me. She didn't understand that engineers thrive under pressure. I wasn't just reacting, I was implementing. The last 24 hours had been wiring, testing, debugging. Now it was time to switch the system on. Where are you watching from? Because if you've ever carried proof into a room where power thought it couldn't be challenged, you know that moment when fear shifts into purpose. The bailiff's voice broke the silence. Counsel for the HOA has arrived. The doors opened. Patricia swept in, heels sharp against the tile, followed by Neil Porter, the HOA's attorney. Her eyes found me at the table, and for the first time, I saw something crack behind her smile. Uncertainty. I closed the binder, rested my hand on the cover, and let my breathing steady. Noon was here. The system I'd built was ready. Patricia had no idea that every paper she'd weaponized was about to become the evidence that undid her. The hearing room filled with the kind of silence that weighs heavy, as if the air itself knew what was about to unfold. Judge Brooks adjusted her glasses and gestured for me to begin. I rose, binder in hand, the scrape of my chair loud against the hush. Patricia sat stiff at the defense table, Neil Porter beside her, shuffling papers he hadn't written. "Your Honor," I said, opening to the first tab. "This is the notice my niece and I received. It demands a verification that doesn't exist in our governing documents." I held it up, the bold letters glaring in the fluorescent light. The judge leaned forward. I continued, flipping to the next tab. "And here are the bylaws. I've highlighted every provision regarding enforcement. Not one grants the HOA authority to compel in-home inspections or residency checks of minors." Patricia shifted in her chair, lips pressed tight. Neil cleared his throat. "Mr. Reyes is misinterpreting the board's discretionary power to ensure safety." I cut him off, voice calm but edged. "Discretionary power requires a vote, counsel. Here are the meeting minutes from the last 3 sessions. I slid copies to the bailiff, who delivered them to the bench. You'll notice gaps, no quorum, no recorded vote, nothing to authorize what Ms. Lang demanded." A murmur rippled through the gallery. Neighbors had shown up, faces I recognized from the pool, the park, the sidewalks. Mrs. Devlin sat with her cane across her lap. The father, whose son's scooter was banned, leaned forward in his seat. They weren't here just for me. They were here because every notice had left a bruise. Marcus entered quietly from the back, his steps hesitant but sure. The judge called him forward, and he raised his right hand. His voice trembled at first, but then steadied. "I'm on the HOA board. The president acted alone. We never voted on a verification policy. She told us council approved it, but no such opinion was shared. It wasn't authorized." Patricia's face flushed crimson. She half rose, then sat back down when Neil placed a hand on her arm. I flipped to my chart, the matrix of authority gaps printed in green, yellow, and a damning wall of red. Here is every enforcement action Patricia has issued in the last 6 months. Green where it's supported, yellow where it's stretched, red where it's fabricated. As you can see, the so-called verification policy is nothing but red. Judge Brooks studied the chart, lips tightening. She glanced at Patricia. "Counsel, do you have authority to point me to in the bylaws?" Neil fumbled, scanning his stack. "Your Honor, the board—" "Answer the question," she snapped. He hesitated. "No, Your Honor. There is no explicit authority." The murmurs grew louder. Someone in the back whispered, "Finally!" Another voice hissed, "Tyrant!" The weight of the room shifted. A collective exhale of pent-up fear released into the Patricia tried to speak, her voice sharp. "I acted in the interest of safety." Judge Brooks raised a hand. Silence. "This court does not tolerate manufactured authority. Children's welfare is not a tool for leverage." The words landed like a hammer. Patricia sagged into her chair, eyes darting away from the crowd that now stared openly at her. For once, she couldn't hide behind letters or notices. Her power didn't extend here. I closed the binder with a soft thud. The sound carried farther than I expected, echoing in the room. It wasn't just the binder shutting. It was the door on her unchecked control. Where are you watching from? Because if you've ever seen a bully lose their footing in front of the very people they tried to control, you know that silence afterward isn't emptiness. It's freedom rushing in. Judge Brooks's ruling came swift and sharp, like a blade cutting through months of intimidation. The court grants the temporary restraining order. All enforcement actions tied to this so-called verification policy are null and void. Fines rescinded. Amenity access restored. Her gavel struck, the sound echoing through the chamber like a door slamming on Patricia's reign. For a moment, the room held its breath. Then the whispers began, swelling into something larger. Neighbors turned to each other, relief spreading like a current. Mrs. Devlin wiped her eyes with a handkerchief. The father with the scooter grinned at his son, who whispered, "Does that mean I can ride again?" Patricia sat frozen, face pale, lips pressed so tight they almost disappeared. Neil Porter stacked his papers in silence, avoiding her gaze. For the first time, she looked small in the chair she had once commanded like a throne. I let out a slow breath, the binder still beneath my hand. Every page inside had carried weight, but none heavier than the responsibility of protecting Sophia. I glanced at her in the gallery. She smiled, a real one this time, eyes shining as if she could finally breathe without fear of being erased. That smile was my verdict, more powerful than the gavel. Marcus stepped closer, voice low. "You did it," he said. His hands still trembled, but this time from release, not fear. "You made it stick." "You helped," I told him. The truth had to come from inside. When we walked out into the courtyard, the desert sun hit like a furnace, but it felt different now, less punishing, more cleansing. Neighbors followed, conversations buzzing. A woman I barely knew stopped me, pressing a folded paper into my hand. "This is my violation notice. If there's a community meeting, count me in." Others nodded, voices layering into momentum. Patricia had ruled by silence. Now, silence was breaking. Later that evening, Sophia and I returned to the pool. The gate chirped as her wristband scanned green. The sound rang out across the concrete deck, sharp and clean. A single note of belonging. She stepped through head high, towel swinging from her shoulder. I followed, the memory of my sister's last words heavy but honored. I promised to keep her daughter safe. Tonight, I kept it. I stood by the water's edge, watching Sophia dive, her form slicing clean into blue. The splash glittered in the floodlights, ripples spreading wider than the lane ropes. That's what victory looks like, not just winning a case, but restoring a space that should never have been stolen. Where are you watching from? Because if you've ever fought for something bigger than yourself, you know that the sound of justice isn't just in gavels or rulings. Sometimes it's in a gate unlocking. Sometimes it's in a child's laugh echoing against the water. Patricia would face consequences beyond this ruling. New elections, transparency demands, neighbors unafraid to speak. But tonight, in the glow of the pool lights, I felt the community shifting. Fear had fractured. Courage was contagious. If you want more stories of homeowners standing up to HOA tyranny, hit subscribe right now, share your story in the comments, and let me know where you're watching from. Together, we make sure no one stands alone against manufactured power.